Dr. Arvid Callan stood at the edge of a cramped shuttle, staring out at the barren wasteland that was Mercury. It wasn't hell, but you could sure see it from here. The only thing more desolate than the planet's surface was Arvid's hope in humanity. "Welcome to the sun's armpit," muttered the pilot, a man who introduced himself only as Grunt. Arvid assumed that if he needed a name like that, he probably had the personality to match. "Charming place," Arvid replied, adjusting his glasses. They were more for show than anything else. Who actually needed glasses in the 24th century? They just made him look more like the brilliant but disillusioned scientist everyone expected. "Ain't it just?" Grunt chuckled, guiding the shuttle into the hidden bay. "If you like being roasted alive on a rock nobody gives a damn about." The bay doors clanked shut, sealing them in darkness. For a moment, Arvid thought it might be a mercy if they just stayed that way. A sudden jolt and hiss of the airlock's opening squashed that fantasy. This was it, the clandestine research base, somewhere deep within Mercury. The place where dreams got ground into dust and possibly, maybe if they were lucky, turned into something useful, like medicine derived from alien bioweapons. "Dr. Callan," a voice cut through the dimly lit hangar. It belonged to a tall, stern woman with the kind of posture that suggested she could snap your neck with a look. Probably had, in fact. "Welcome to Project Lazarus. I'm Dr. Ida Voss, Project Lazarus." Arvid tossed her a look that screamed skepticism. "Really? That's the best you could come up with?" Ida's lips twitched into what might have been a smile if you squinted. "We thought it appropriate, given the circumstances. Resurrecting humanity's future and all that." Arvid shrugged. "Or just coming back from the dead with a vengeance." She led him through a labyrinth of corridors that smelled faintly of burnt metal and despair. The walls were a dull gray, like the designers had simply given up halfway through decorating. "This way," Ida said, not bothering to check if Arvid was keeping up. "We've got a lot to cover and not much time." "We've got all the time in the world, assuming we ignore the giant space rock about to terraform us into cosmic soup," Arvid replied dryly. Ida's pace didn't falter. "Yes, there's that." They entered a large operations room, bustling with scientists, engineers, and a few people who looked like they'd gotten lost on their way to a comic convention. Screens covered every available surface, displaying data so complex you'd need a PhD just to have the privilege of being confused by it. "This is where the magic happens," Ida declared. "Or, the science that might save our collective asses." Arvid peered at one of the screens, pretending to understand the streams of alien biology codes. "What's our current status, besides doomed?" Ida smirked. "We're making progress, slow, painful progress." "Sounds about right." Arvid reached into his coat pocket, fishing for the stress ball he kept there. Squeezing it was a ritual, like counting sheep, but for impending disaster. "We've managed to isolate several strains that could be key to halting the terraforming process," Ida explained, motioning toward the glowing green blobs on the screen. "Alien bioweapons, originally intended to wipe us out, might just save us. The universe's idea of a sick joke," Arvid muttered. "But I'm listening." A loud clatter interrupted them as a wiry young man stumbled into the room, tripping over his own enthusiasm. "Dr. Callan, I've read your papers." They were, he paused, searching for the right word, adequate. "High praise indeed," Arvid shot back, not bothering to conceal his smirk. "This is Byron," Ida interjected, as if apologizing for him already. "Junior researcher and resident fanboy." "Nice to meet you, Dr. Callan," Byron said, extending a hand which Arvid regarded like it was a particularly annoying microbe. "Let's skip the pleasantries," Arvid said, turning back to Ida. "What's the backup plan if this all goes sideways?" Ida's face hardened. "There isn't one." "Ah, the good old we're so screwed, let's go down swinging strategy." Arvid ran a hand through his hair, feeling the weight of an impending apocalypse. "What could possibly go wrong?" "Exactly," Ida replied with a wry grin. They moved to another part of the operations room, where a holographic display showed Mercury's surface in disturbing detail. Flashes of red marked areas of concern, places where the terraforming disaster would hit hardest. "We've got less than 6 months before the process becomes irreversible," Ida explained, gesturing at the map. "If we can't turn these bioweapons into a countermeasure, well, we all get a front row seat to the end of everything," Arvid finished for her. Byron bounced beside them, clearly more comfortable with theoretical extinction than he should be. "But if we succeed, we not only stop the disaster but create treatments for diseases thought incurable. And if we fail, we create really effective funeral pyres," Arvid added. "Always the optimist," Ida said with a grin. A sudden alarm blared, shattering the room's tense but manageable atmosphere. Scientists scrambled like ants in a disturbed nest. "What now?" Arvid shouted over the chaos. Ida was already moving, barking orders like a general. "Byron, check the containment units. Dr. Callan with me." They hurried through the maze of corridors to the containment area where a small crowd had gathered. A massive viewing window revealed several containment pods, one of which was engulfed in smoke. "Isn't that just delightful?" Arvid muttered, watching technicians frantically try to seal breaches. "Nothing says we've got this under control like a little explosion." Ida's expression was grim. "This shouldn't be happening." "No, but if things only happened the way they should, life would be dreadfully boring," Arvid quipped. A heavy-set technician approached, wiping sweat from his brow. "The bioweapon samples are becoming unstable. We're losing containment." "Great," Arvid said, sarcasm dripping. "Nothing like a bit of instability to liven things up." "Shut it down," Ida ordered. "We can't afford a full breach." "Shutting it down means losing months of data," the technician protested. "And not shutting it down might mean losing all our lives," Arvid countered. "I vote we take the safe bet." Reluctantly, the technician nodded and initiated the shutdown protocol. The alarms silenced, leaving an uneasy calm in their wake. "Well, that was fun," Arvid said flatly. "Let's never do it again." Ida gave a weary nod. "Agreed, but this is just the beginning. We've got to get this right and fast." Arvid leaned against the wall, the weight of their task pressing down like Mercury's gravity. No pressure then. Just the small matter of saving humanity from itself. "Exactly," Ida replied, her voice a mix of determination and fatigue. As they returned to the operations room, Arvid couldn't shake the feeling that they were standing on the edge of a very steep cliff, and someone somewhere was just waiting to give them a push. "Let's get back to it," Ida said, pulling up the latest data on her screen. "No time like the present to try and avoid annihilation." Arvid sighed, his mind already racing with possibilities, risks, and the slim chance of success. "Let's save the world," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else, because if he didn't, well, at least he could say he tried, and maybe, just maybe, they'd pull off the impossible, or die spectacularly in the attempt. The operations room felt like someone had shaken a snow globe filled with computers and anxiety. Lights blinked erratically, reflecting the general mood of the personnel, who looked like they were one caffeine hit away from a nervous breakdown. Arvid stood next to Ida, nursing his second cup of something that pretended to be coffee, but tasted more like battery acid. "Well," Arvid began, "if we wanted a challenge, we sure found it. What's next on our suicide list?" Before Ida could answer, the airlock hissed open with the dramatic flair usually reserved for villains in cheap holovids. Captain Vea Toran strode in, all business and battle scars. Her presence was less hello and more get out of my way or I'll make you. She had the kind of face that could launch 1,000 ships or 1,000 complaints to HR. "Dr. Callan," she said, nodding at him. Her voice was a rough scrape like metal against metal. "Heard you were leading this circus." "Leading might be generous," Arvid replied. "I'm more like the ringleader trying not to get trampled by the elephants." "Then let's make sure those elephants don't turn into rampaging wyverns," Vea retorted, turning her gaze to Ida. "Status report." Ida didn't miss a beat. "We've isolated several alien bioweapon strains. They are unstable, but we're close to figuring out how to use them without blowing ourselves into the next millennium." "Lovely," Vea said, folding her arms. "I'm here to make sure that doesn't happen," Arvid chuckled. "And here I thought you were just here for the free coffee." "Nope," Vea grinned, a feral thing that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm here for the explosion-free environment." As if to mock her words, the door slid open again, and in slithered Kallax, the enigmatic alien liaison. With skin that shimmered like liquid mercury and a gaze that bore into souls, Kallax was both fascinating and unsettling, a bit like a car crash you couldn't look away from. "Dr. Callan," Kallax said, in that eerily calm monotone, "I trust the situation is manageable." "Manageable in the same way juggling flaming chainsaws is manageable," Arvid replied, offering a lopsided grin. "You have a peculiar sense of humor, Doctor," Kallax observed, without any indication of whether they appreciated it. "Comes with the territory," Arvid said. "Now let's talk alien bioweapons." They moved to a far corner of the operations room, where strange devices hummed and glowed with an unsettling green light. Kallax gestured to a holographic projection of the bioweapon strains, each one a swirling mass of potential doom. "Our analysis indicates that these bioweapons contain a latent energy signature," Kallax explained. "A signature that, if activated improperly, could result in catastrophic outcomes." "Catastrophic outcomes," Vea repeated. "Nice way to say we might all die." "Precisely," Kallax agreed, with the serene composure of someone discussing the weather. Arvid leaned in closer, eyes narrowing at the flickering hologram. "This energy signature, it's what powers the terraforming, right? But if we can harness it, redirect it, we could turn it from a weapon to a cure." Ida finished, her eyes bright with a dangerous mix of hope and desperation. "Or," Vea interjected, "we could screw up spectacularly and trigger the very apocalypse we're trying to prevent." "High-stakes poker," Arvid muttered, rubbing his temples. "And we're betting with lives. Then we better not lose," Ida said, her tone a grim promise. As they pored over the data, Byron appeared at Arvid's side like a particularly eager shadow. Dr. Callan, he began, eyes wide with a mix of fear and excitement. I've been analyzing the energy signature. There's a pattern, like a code. A code, Arvid echoed. Please tell me it's not abandon all hope. Byron shook his head, pushing his glasses up his nose, more like a failsafe. I think the original designers built it in as a precaution. Calex's eyes gleamed with something perilously close to approval. Intriguing. It suggests a level of sophistication and caution. Great, Vea said, because when I think of aliens who design weapons capable of wiping us out, I want to believe they care about safety protocols. Byron continued, undeterred by the sarcasm. If we can decode it, we might be able to control the activation sequence, use it to our advantage. And if we can't, Ida asked. Then Byron said, his voice dropping, it's game over. Arvid rubbed his chin, already feeling the stubble of a beard that was more neglect than fashion statement. All right, let's see if we can break this code. Byron, you take the lead. Calex, any insights you can provide would be invaluable. Calex inclined their head in a gesture that might have been a nod. I will assist where I can. As Byron and Calex started their work, Arvid and Vea moved to a quieter corner, away from the humming machinery and frantic scribbling of equations. You trust this? Vea asked, nodding towards Byron and Calex. I trust desperation and a lack of better options, Arvid replied. Both are powerful motivators. Fair enough, Vea said. But if things go sideways, then we'll improvise, Arvid cut in, like we always do. She gave him a look, part admiration, part pity. You ever think about what you'll do if we succeed? Not really, he admitted. I figure I'll leave the celebrating for after we don't die. Vea nodded, a shadow of a smile playing on her lips. That's a plan I can get behind. Hours passed, the team working in a frenzy of calculations and caffeine-fueled madness. The tension in the room was palpable, like a storm cloud ready to unleash a downpour of chaos. Byron huddled over his screen, muttering equations like mantras, while Calex glided silently from station to station, offering quiet advice. Finally, Byron straightened, a look of triumph on his face. I think I've got it. The room fell silent, all eyes on the young researcher who seemed to have cracked the code that could save them all or doom them. You sure? Ida asked, her voice sharp with hope and fear. Pretty sure, Byron said, fingers dancing over the keyboard. I've managed to isolate the failsafe activation sequence. If we input it correctly, we can control the energy release. Pretty sure doesn't sound very reassuring, Vea remarked, arms crossed. Hey, it's the 24th century, Arvid interjected. Pretty sure is the new certain. Then let's test it, Ida said, taking charge. Byron, input the sequence. Let's see if we can tame this beast. Byron nodded, fingers flying across the keys with a speed that spoke of either incredible confidence or sheer desperation. The room watched in tense silence as the alien code shimmered on the screen, a cryptic dance of symbols and numbers. The bioweapon strains in their containment pods began to glow with an eerie light, the energy signature pulsing like a heartbeat. Arvid held his breath along with everyone else as Byron executed the final command. For a moment, nothing happened, and Arvid felt the icy fingers of dread wrap around his spine. Then slowly, the glow began to stabilize, the wild pulse of energy settling into a calm, steady rhythm. Did we just win? Vea asked, disbelief coloring her voice. Not yet, Arvid said, forcing himself to stay grounded. This is just the start. The room erupted in a muted cheer, the kind of restrained celebration that comes when you're terrified you might jinx your own success. Arvid found himself grinning despite the odds, feeling the kind of cautious optimism that was usually followed by a kick to the teeth. Looks like we've got a fighting chance, Ida said, her eyes bright with resolve. But we're not done yet, Arvid reminded them. We've got the energy signature under control, but we still need to figure out how to turn this into a viable medical solution, and do it before the clock runs out, Vea added. Right, Arvid agreed, no pressure. Just the fate of humanity resting on our ability to not screw this up. Calex stepped forward, their alien a steadying presence amidst the turmoil. We must proceed with caution and precision. The next steps are crucial. Well then, Arvid said, clapping his hands together, let's get back to work. We've got a world to save, and I'm not planning on missing the after-party. As the team dove back into their research, Arvid felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in a long time, hope. It was a fragile thing, easily crushed under the weight of reality, but it was there, glimmering like a distant star in the void, and for now, that was enough. The operations room was a hive of organized chaos, or more accurately, disorganized panic barely held together by coffee and denial. Arvid Callan sipped his third cup of said denial, grimacing as the bitter liquid did its best impression of acid reflux. Perfect, just what he needed on top of an impending apocalypse, heartburn. They say cough is a diuretic, Vea remarked, watching him with a smirk. You sure about that third cup? Well, considering we're up to our necks in alien shenanigans, I'd say my kidneys can handle the sacrifice. Vea chuckled, which was a rarity in itself, and the room seemed to relax just a fraction. But that fleeting moment of levity was shattered when an alarm blared, the kind of sound that makes your heart jump and your brain scream. "Oh crap, what now?" Grunt, the pilot with a name as subtle as a brick, stormed in, shaking his head like he'd just walked through a rain of stupidity. "Got a situation, folks," he announced, voice like gravel being crushed under a steel boot. "One of the containment pods is acting up. Looks like a technical fault." "Acting up," Arvid echoed, eyebrows climbing. "You mean to tell me our state-of-the-art alien bioweapon containment system is throwing a tantrum like a toddler?" "Yeah, and it ain't asking for a juice box, neither," Grunt replied, arms crossed like he was daring anyone to make a joke about his intelligence. Arvid turned to Ida, who was already scanning the data. "We need to stabilize it fast. If that pod breaches, we're all getting a front row seat to our own funeral." The team sprang into action with the kind of urgency you'd expect when death was on the table. Byron was frantically typing, his fingers a blur of motion, while Ida coordinated with the engineers who looked as stressed as a turkey on Thanksgiving. "Shouldn't be a problem," Ida said with the kind of optimism only seen in disaster movies right before everything goes to hell. "We've got redundancies. It's probably just a sensor glitch." "Right," Arvid muttered, "probably just a glitch. Like the time I tried to microwave a metal fork and thought, hey, what's the worst that could happen?" Byron peered over his screen, a hint of worry at the edges of his enthusiasm. "Dr. Callan, there's something else," he said, eyes darting everywhere but directly at Arvid. "I think someone's been tampering with the systems." Silence, the kind that makes your skin crawl and your mind leap to all the worst-case scenarios. Sabotage, in a place where one wrong move could turn everything into cosmic dust. Fantastic. Sabotage, Vea hissed, her voice like a whip. "Who the hell would be that insane?" "Well, we are on Mercury, the hottest vacation spot this side of the sun," Arvid quipped. "Insanity seems to come with the territory. But seriously," Vea pressed, "if there's a traitor on board, we need to find them before they turn this place into a crater." Kallax, who'd been observing the exchange with an unsettling calm, finally spoke. "Identifying the source of sabotage requires careful investigation. I suggest heightened security protocols." "Great," Grunt grunted. "More protocols. Just what we need when everything's falling apart." As the team worked to stabilize the pod and chase down the mysterious saboteur, Arvid found himself in the operations room again, staring at the flickering holographic displays with the kind of intensity you'd expect from someone desperately avoiding reality. "You look like a man contemplating his own mortality," Vea said, joining him. "More like a man contemplating the universe's worst practical joke," Arvid replied. "Why us? Why now?" "Because the universe has a sick sense of humor," Vea said with a shrug, and we're the punchline." Meanwhile, Byron and Ida were huddled over a console, deep in a whispered conversation. As Arvid approached, Ida looked up, her face serious. "We've got a lead," she said. "The sabotage, it's localized. Someone's been accessing the systems from within the base, so it's not just an external threat," Byron added, his expression a mix of determination and apprehension. "Could be anyone here." "Splendid," Arvid sighed. "An inside job, because dealing with unstable alien technology wasn't enough. Whoever's responsible has to be stopped," Ida insisted. "Or they could undo everything we've achieved." "Well, let's hope they're not too keen on the idea of apocalypse," Arvid said. "We need to tighten security and keep an eye on everyone's activities." "Already on it," Vea said, signaling to her team to begin monitoring communications and access logs. "We'll find them." As they worked to unravel the mystery of the saboteur, the team was still battling the unpredictable nature of the alien bioweapon. The energy signature, once a stable pulse, had started to show signs of instability, flickering like a broken neon sign. "What's going on?" Arvid demanded, his voice strained with the weight of 1,000 doomed hopes. "The energy pattern is fluctuating," Ida replied, her eyes fixed on the readouts. "We need to recalibrate or it's going to go critical." "Right," Arvid said, rolling his shoulders as if preparing for a fight. "Let's get to it then. No use panicking when there's work to be done." The team worked in a frenzy of calculations and adjustments, trying desperately to regain control. But the energy pattern continued to resist their efforts, stubbornly refusing to stabilize. Just as the tension in the room reached a crescendo, Kallax stepped forward. "There is another option," they said, voice calm and unwavering. "An experimental approach that may yield results." "Experimental, huh?" Arvid said, raising an eyebrow. "And here I thought we were already living dangerously." Kallax's eyes shimmered with an intensity that was both unsettling and strangely reassuring. "It involves manipulating the energy signature at a molecular level. It is risky, but it may provide the stability we require." "Risky like a blindfolded skydiver?" Vea asked, arms crossed. "Precisely," Kallax replied, without a hint of irony. Well, we're out of options, Arvid said, casting a glance around the room. We might as well try it. What's the worst that could happen? Don't tempt fate, Grunt muttered. It's got a perverse sense of humor. As Kalax outlined their plan, the team prepared for the delicate operation. Arvid watched as the alien manipulated the controls with a grace that was both alien and oddly mesmerizing. Here goes nothing, Ida said, fingers poised over the keyboard to assist with the adjustments. The next few minutes were a blur of tension and concentration, the team holding their collective breath as Kalax executed the procedure. For a heart-stopping moment, it seemed like the energy signature would spiral out of control, but then, miraculously, it stabilized. A collective sigh of relief swept through the room, mingled with disbelief and cautious optimism. Well, I'll be damned, Vea said, shaking her head. It actually worked. For now, Arvid cautioned. We may have bought ourselves some time, but we're not out of the woods yet. As the team regrouped, Byron approached Arvid, a worried look on his face. Dr. Callan, the activation window, it's shrinking. If we don't finalize the process soon, we might lose our chance. Just when things were looking up, Arvid said, rubbing his temples. All right, let's push forward. We need to finalize the transformation process before it's too late. With renewed urgency, the team dove back into their work, each task a piece of the puzzle that could spell either success or disaster. Despite the looming threat, Arvid couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. They were closer than ever to a breakthrough, if only they could keep it together long enough to see it through. But as the clock ticked down, the specter of the saboteur lingered in the back of everyone's minds, a shadow that threatened to unravel their hard-won progress. The stakes had never been higher, and failure was not an option. As Arvid looked around at his team, he knew they were in for the fight of their lives. But for the first time, it felt like they just might stand a chance. And in this grim, absurd universe, that was something worth clinging to. Arvid Callan adjusted his glasses for what felt like the millionth time that day, a pointless gesture in the 24th century, but somehow it made him feel like he had some semblance of control over his life. As the chaos in the operations room swirled around him, he took a deep breath, trying to focus on the task at hand. The energy signature had stabilized for now, but a million new problems had cropped up in its wake. All right, team, listen up, Arvid called, raising his voice over the din of frantic activity. We've got a temporary reprieve, but we've also got a mystery saboteur and enough stress to make a therapy bot self-destruct. We need to figure this out before it all goes belly up. Yeah, Grunt chimed in from his corner, because nothing says good times like a ticking time bomb with a sense of humor. Speaking of humor, Vea added, her voice dripping with sarcasm, let's add some fun facts to the mix. Kalax has something to share. All eyes turned to Kalax, the enigmatic alien who had been such a steady presence in their midst. Kalax's shimmering form seemed to flicker slightly as they prepared to speak, a subtle reminder that appearances could be deceiving. The bioweapon you are dealing with, Kalax began, their voice smooth but laden with a kind of gravitas that made everyone shut up and listen, was not intended as a weapon at all. It was a pioneering form of terraforming, designed to rejuvenate dying worlds. The creators sought to heal, not to harm. A silence descended over the room, filled only by the hum of machinery and the distant clatter of Byron's frenetic typing. Terraforming? You're kidding, Ida said, her skepticism plain as day. If that's healing, I'd hate to see their definition of a band-aid. Kalax inclined their head slightly, acknowledging the point. The technology was repurposed by those with less noble intentions. What was meant to nurture has been twisted into something destructive. So you're telling me, Arvid said, rubbing his temples, that we're sitting on a cosmic doctor's kit that's been turned into a doomsday device. Fantastic. Just what we needed. Correct, Kalax replied, their voice as steady as a rock in a storm. But the core functions remain. With the right adjustments, you could restore the original intent. And how exactly do you suggest we do that? Byron interjected, his fingers pausing over the keyboard. Because I'm fresh out of miracle software patches. By realigning the energy matrices, Kalax explained, their fingers dancing over the controls in a demonstration. It is a delicate process, but if successful, it could stabilize the planetside environments permanently. A permanent solution, Ida echoed, her eyes lighting up with a glimmer of hope. That would change everything. Yeah, assuming we don't blow ourselves to bits first, Vea said, her voice a cynical counterpoint to Ida's newfound optimism. There's still the matter of the saboteur, remember? Right, Arvid agreed. As much as I'd love to play Cosmic Gardener, we've got to root out the bad apple first. Who's mixing metaphors now? Grunt quipped, earning a glare from Arvid. Focus, people, Arvid snapped, though a smile tugged at his lips. We need to solve this, and fast. Vea, can you tighten security on the containment pods? Byron, dig deeper into those access logs. Whoever's been messing with our systems might have left some breadcrumbs. And what about me? Grunt asked, leaning against the wall with an air of nonchalance that was far from genuine. Stand by, Arvid said. If things go south, we'll need that shuttle prepped for emergency evacuation. Copy that, Grunt replied, his demeanor shifting to the serious focus of a veteran pilot. As the team dispersed to their appointed tasks, Arvid took a moment to collect his thoughts. The revelation from Kallax had shifted the stakes dramatically. The bioweapon was a terraforming tool, a potential savior instead of a destroyer. But the shadow of sabotage loomed large, threatening to snuff out their chances before they could even begin. So, Vaya said, sidling up next to him, you think we can pull this off? Honestly, Arvid replied, a wry smile playing on his lips. I've got no bloody idea, but when has that ever stopped us? Good point, Vaya said with a chuckle. In that case, let's make sure we don't end up as a cautionary tale for future generations. Assuming there are future generations, Arvid quipped before heading back to his console. The operations room buzzed with a frenetic energy, each member of the team a cog in a machine that was desperately trying not to fall apart. They were balancing on the edge of a knife, and every second counted. As Byron sifted through lines of data, his brow furrowed in concentration, Arvid joined him, peering over his shoulder. Anything yet? Not much, Byron replied, frustration evident in his voice. Whoever it is, they're good, but I did find something odd, a series of access attempts from an old terminal in Sector 3. It's been offline for years. Sector 3, Arvid said, a frown creasing his forehead. That's practically in the base's armpit. Why would anyone use that? Beats me, Byron said, shrugging. But if we're looking for breadcrumbs, this might be the start of a trail. Then let's follow it, Arvid decided. Grab your gear, we're going for a stroll. Sector 3 was a ghost town, its corridors silent and lined with dust, a forgotten backwater in the heart of Mercury's sun-baked wasteland. As Arvid and Byron made their way through the dim passageways, Arvid couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Ever get the feeling we're in a horror vid? Byron asked, his voice echoing slightly in the empty hall. Every day on this rock, Arvid replied. Just keep your eyes peeled. As they rounded a corner, they found the terminal, an antique relic in a world that had long since moved on. Arvid approached it cautiously, half expecting it to explode in his face. Well, he muttered, brushing off a layer of dust. Looks like someone's been using this old junker. Byron, see what you can pull from it. Byron nodded, hooking up a portable interface to the terminal. Give me a minute, he said, fingers flying over his device. As Byron worked, Arvid examined the surrounding area, looking for anything out of the ordinary. A faint scuff mark on the floor caught his eye, leading to a panel in the wall that looked slightly ajar. Hey, Byron, Arvid called, pointing to the panel. I think we've got something. Byron glanced up, his interest piqued. Let me finish this up and I'll check it out. Minutes ticked by as Byron worked his magic, extracting data from the ancient system. Finally, he looked up, a triumphant smile on his face. Got it. Logs show multiple access attempts in the past few weeks. Whoever's behind this has been using this terminal as a backdoor into our systems. Nice work, Arvid said, clapping Byron on the shoulder. Now let's see what's behind door number 1. Together, they pried open the panel, revealing a narrow passageway that led deeper into the bowels of the base. The air was stale and heavy, carrying with it a sense of foreboding. Great, Byron said with a grimace. Just what I wanted, a tour of Mercury's most scenic crawlspaces. Think of it as an adventure, Arvid said, trying to inject some levity into the situation. Yeah, right, Byron replied, because when I signed up for a career in science, spelunking in creepy corridors was top of my list. The passageway twisted and turned, leading them to a small, dimly lit room filled with equipment that looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. In the center of the room was a makeshift workstation, cluttered with tools and scribbled notes. Looks like we found the saboteur's nest, Arvid said, gesturing to the chaotic scene. Byron scanned the notes, his eyes widening as he took in their contents. This is incredible, he breathed. They're detailed plans for manipulating the bioweapon's energy matrices. Whoever's behind this knows their science. Too bad they're using it for all the wrong reasons, Arvid said, his voice grim. We need to get this back to the others. As they made their way back to the operations room, Arvid couldn't shake the feeling that they'd just scratched the surface of a much deeper mystery. The saboteur was one of their own, someone with the knowledge and skill to turn their potential salvation into a nightmare. You're worried, Byron said, breaking the thoughtful silence. Aren't you? Arvid replied. We've got a saboteur who's smarter than your average bear and a ticking time bomb of a bioweapon. It's a match made in hell. True, Byron admitted, but at least now we have a chance to stop them. Yeah, Arvid agreed, a determined glint in his eye, and we'd better make sure we do, or this will be Mercury's last stand. As they re-entered the operations room, the weight of their discovery hung heavy in the air. The team looked up expectantly, their faces a mix of hope and dread. We've got a lead, Arvid announced, holding up the notes, and we're going to need everyone's help to figure this out. Count me in, Vaya said, her voice firm with resolve. We've come too far to let it all go to waste now. Agreed, Ida chimed in. Let's put this puzzle together and find out who's been pulling the strings. As the team gathered around, Arvid felt a sense of camaraderie that was rare in a place as bleak as Mercury. They were in this together, for better or worse, and together they'd face whatever challenges lay ahead. All right, folks, Arvid said, a note of determination in his voice. Let's get to work. We've got a world to save. Arvid Callan sat in the operations room, sipping his second cup of Mercury's finest dishwater coffee, which was saying something considering the first had tasted like recycled engine oil. Around him, the team moved like ants who'd just discovered their hill was a death trap, each clutching a piece of the puzzle like it might save them from the impending catastrophe. All right, folks, Arvid said, tapping the side of his coffee mug with a pen, drawing attention like a shoddy magician at a kid's birthday party. Here's what we're going to do. Attack the problem like it's that annoying song stuck in your head, relentlessly. Attack, huh? Grunt chimed in, leaning back in his chair with a smirk. With what? Sarcasm and wishful thinking. Both are excellent weapons in our limited arsenal, Arvid retorted, shrugging. Unless you've got something more explosive stashed in your locker. Don't tempt me, Grunt chuckled, shaking his head. Byron, Arvid continued, keep up with those system checks. If there's a Trojan horse hiding in our code, I want it found and gutted. Ida, you're our breath of fresh skepticism. Double-check Calyx's steps on those energy matrices. Ida raised an eyebrow. You saying you don't trust our shimmering friend's expertise? I'm saying trust but verify, Arvid said, adjusting his glasses for effect. Last I checked, transparency wasn't in Calyx's feature set. Hey, I'm all for double-checking, Byron added, fingers already dancing across his keyboard. Especially if it means we don't end up as a statistic in some future historian's lecture on what not to do in a crisis. Or worse, Vea chimed in, rolling her eyes, featured in a biopic with the tagline Scientists, they tried. The lights flickered ominously, casting unsettling shadows across the room. The bass groaned, a sound Arvid had grown to associate with something important breaking, usually followed by a lot of swearing. Well, isn't that just peachy? Vea muttered, her tone as dry as Mercury's surface. I love ambience. As if on cue, the power systems decided to throw a fit, plunging the base into semi-darkness. Emergency lights flickered on, casting everything in a sickly, institutional glow. Looks like Mercury's borrowing mood lighting from horror vids, Byron said, his face illuminated by the pale light of his console. Lovely. Okay, Arvid said, raising his voice to be heard over the growing hum of failing systems. Grunt, prep the shuttle for a fast exit, just in case. On it, Grunt replied, already halfway out the door. The man moved like he had a personal vendetta against the idea of standing still. Arvid turned back to his console, punching in commands and hoping the power fluctuations didn't decide to make things even more interesting. The room was a cacophony of alarms and stressed-out scientists, and he had a front-row seat to the chaos. Where's that damn therapy bot when you need it? Arvid muttered, eyes glued to the screen. Probably sitting in a corner, debating its own existential crisis. Not like it has a monopoly on that, Ida said, leaning over his shoulder to check his work. How's it going? Just peachy, Arvid grumbled. If this gets any better, we'll be hosting a wake, Ida snorted. At least the guest list is small. Perks of being stationed on the sun's armpit. As if the universe wanted to remind them it could indeed get worse, the base shuddered with a violent tremor. Arvid's coffee took a suicidal leap off the desk, splattering across the floor like a crime scene. Great, he muttered, eyeing the mess. Mercury's out for blood. Better the coffee than us, Ida remarked, her usual stoicism cracking just enough for a dry smile. Let's keep it that way, Arvid replied. Systems are stabilizing for now, but I wouldn't bet your life savings on it. Joke's on you, Ida said. Already spent them on this vacation package. Meanwhile, Byron had discovered something of interest, a flare of excitement amidst the grim realities. Arvid, you're going to want to see this. Arvid jogged over, squinting at the screen. What have you got? Somebody's been having a party in our systems, Byron explained, pointing out a series of anomalies. Looks like a coordinated sabotage. And guess who's been inviting themselves to the show? Don't keep us in suspense, Arvid said, though his gut already twisted with suspicion. Byron tapped a few keys and the screen filled with logs. The saboteur's been bouncing signals through our own network. They know our systems inside out. Wonderful, Arvid said, clenching his jaw, just when I thought today couldn't get any better. Vea, who'd been listening in, shook her head. If I didn't know any better, I'd say we're dealing with someone who's made this personal. Too bad we can't return the favor, Arvid said, though a plan was already forming in his mind. Byron, can you isolate the origin of those signals? Doing it now, Byron replied, fingers flying over the controls. The tension in the room ratcheted higher, like a string pulled too tight. Everyone was on edge, the weight of their situation a constant presence. Got it, Byron said finally. They're coming from inside the base. Sector 3 again. Damn, Arvid muttered. We've got a rat in the walls. Then it's up to us to flush them out, Vea said, cracking her knuckles in anticipation. Right, Arvid said, feeling a dangerous mix of anger and determination. Let's take a look at our little breach. The trek to Sector 3 was like walking into the mouth of a beast. Every footstep echoed ominously, the dark corridors whispering secrets of their own. Feels like the set of a bad horror vid, Vea commented, her voice tinged with sarcasm. Hope they're paying us extra for this. Yes, Arvid replied, scanning the shadows. I'll check my non-existent pay raise when we get back. Byron led the way, his handheld scanner casting an eerie glow. Just find the rat, he said. Preferably before we're the ones getting flushed. They reached the terminal, its screen flickering like a dying star. Arvid knelt beside it, tracing a finger over the keys. This is where it all started, he murmured. Let's hope it's where it ends too, Vea replied, watching the hallway for any signs of trouble. Byron moved to the panel, prying it open to reveal the narrow passageway from before. Time to go down the rabbit hole, he said, voice dripping with reluctance. Why do I feel like I'm about to find a mad hatter with a vendetta? Vea asked, eyeing the passage. Because you're an optimist at heart, Arvid quipped, leading the way. The crawl space was as inviting as a coffin, each step forward one closer to a confrontation with their unseen adversary. The air smelled of metal and neglect, a testament to the forgotten history of the base. Remind me to request a room with a view next time, Byron said, his humor an attempt to stave off the claustrophobia. They emerged into the small room they'd discovered earlier, the scene unchanged. The makeshift workstation seemed to taunt them with its chaotic assembly of notes and data. Looks like no one's home, Vea said, though her eyes remained alert. Or they're lying in wait, Arvid replied, and while he didn't like the idea, he liked the thought of being caught off guard even less. Byron moved to the workstation, scanning the data with an intensity that bordered on obsession. There's gotta be something here that'll tell us who we're dealing with. Arvid watched him work, a sense of urgency clawing at him. This was their chance to uncover the saboteur's identity, and it couldn't come a moment too soon. Wait, Byron said, his voice a note of triumph. I think I've got something. Arvid joined him, peering at the screen. What is it? Byron pointed to a line of code buried in the logs. Look at this. It's a signature, a digital fingerprint, and it belongs to someone we know. Arvid felt a chill run through him. Who? Byron hesitated, then said the name. Dr. Ida Voss. Arvid blinked, disbelief warring with understanding. Ida, she's been playing us, Byron said, his voice edged with betrayal. All the while leading us right where she wanted, or where someone else wanted, Arvid said, though the words tasted bitter in his mouth. We need to confront her. We will, Vea said, her eyes hard with resolve. But we need to be smart about it. As they made their way back to the operations room, Arvid's mind raced. Ida, the one he'd trusted to check Kallax's work, the one who'd been skeptical of everything. Had her skepticism been a cover all along? Do you think she's working alone? Byron asked, voice low. I don't know, Arvid replied, but if she's not, we need to find out who else is involved and fast. Back in the operations room, the atmosphere was tense, the air thick with unspoken questions. Ida was at her station, her expression unreadable as she worked. Arvid approached her, keeping his expression neutral. Ida, he said, we need to talk. She looked up, her eyes meeting his with a calmness that set his nerves on edge. What about the anomalies Byron found? Arvid said, gesturing to the screen. They lead back to you. He watched as her expression shifted, surprise, anger, then something like resignation. Is that so? She said, her voice cool. You know it is, Arvid said, keeping his tone even. Why? Ida sighed, setting her tools aside. You wouldn't understand. Try me, Arvid said, hoping against hope that there was an explanation he could stomach. I'm not the villain here, Ida said, her voice a mix of defiance and weariness. I'm trying to save us. By sabotaging the project, Vea asked, skepticism heavy in her tone. By stopping something worse, Ida replied, her eyes hardening. You think the real danger is that bioweapon. There's more to this than you know. Then enlighten us, Arvid said, crossing his arms. Ida hesitated, then nodded. All right, but be ready because it's not what you expect. As she began to explain, Arvid felt the weight of yet another unexpected twist settle on his shoulders. The path forward was fraught with uncertainty, but if they were going to survive, they'd have to unravel this tangled web before it unraveled them. Arvid stared at Ida, half expecting her to pull a rabbit out of a hat or start chanting some ancient curse. All right, Ida, spill it. What's the real threat here? Ida glanced around, checking to see who was listening, as if she had state secrets that would make heads roll, literally. You want the abridged version or the full soap opera? Cliff notes work for me, Arvid replied, crossing his arms. I've got better things to do than watch Mercury's version of As the World Burns. Ida leaned back, her expression shifting between frustration and resignation. Project Lazarus was never just about terraforming or saving humanity. It's about control. Whoever masters this tech could reshape worlds or destroy them. We've got players who are far more interested in the latter. Isn't that a lovely thought? Byron muttered, tapping away at his console. Who knew doing science would give us front-row seats to civilization's demise? And you're sabotaging the project because I refuse to let it fall into the wrong hands, Ida said, her voice firm. The way things are, it's like handing a loaded gun to a toddler and hoping they take up juggling instead. Okay, that's a nightmare I didn't need, Vea cut in, rubbing her temples. So what's our next move? Preferably one that doesn't involve us becoming space debris. Arvid scratched his chin, his brain whirring like an overworked engine. We need a radical shift. What if we harness the bioweapons energy for medicine instead? Something that actually benefits people. Yes, Grunt piped up from the corner, his sarcasm cutting through like a rusty blade. Because that's just a hop, skip, and a jump away from what we're doing now. Hey, if you've got a better idea, I'm all ears, Grunt, Arvid shot back, though the prospect of trying to pull off a tech miracle with their current resources was enough to make him want to bang his head against the wall. Grunt held his hands up. No, I'm here for the ride. Just make sure it doesn't end in a fiery crash, yeah? Look, Arvid continued, all we need is to reroute the energy matrices of the bioweapon, turn something destructive into something life-giving. It's not perfect, but it's a start. Captain Vea stepped forward, looking more serious than a heart attack. We'll need everyone on board for this. No more internal squabbling. We've got a common enemy, and it's not each other. Agreed, Arvid nodded. Ida, you with us? Ida hesitated, then nodded. I'm in. Let's try to do some good before we all go out in a blaze of glory. Great, Byron said, already diving into the new task with a fervor that bordered on obsessive. I'll start reworking the interface. But if things go south, I'm blaming you, Arvid. Arvid grinned, though it felt more like baring teeth. That's the spirit. Now, let's get to work before we're left with nothing but bad memories and worse coffee. The team fell into a rhythm, the atmosphere in the room shifting from tense to something approaching hopeful desperation. Arvid bounced between stations, checking progress, throwing out sarcastic encouragement like confetti at a particularly bleak parade. Grunt and Byron clashed over wiring configurations, their banter keeping spirits up even as the stakes loomed ever larger. Byron, if you mess this up, I'm putting you tried on your tombstone, Grunt jabbed, a smirk on his face. At least I'll have a legacy, Byron shot back, fingers flying over his keyboard. What's yours? Snarky comments and a questionable taste in music. Focus, children, Arvid interjected, though he couldn't help but grin. We're not saving the universe through insults. Vea monitored the security systems like a hawk, ensuring that no outside threats would add to their already overloaded plate. If anyone else gets in here, I'm using them for target practice. The minutes ticked by, each one feeling like an eternity. Arvid's mind worked overtime, calculating risks, weighing options. If they could just stabilize the energy output, redirect it, maybe they'd have a shot at not just surviving, but actually making a damn difference. Arvid, Ida called, her voice tense. We've got a problem. Of course they did. Arvid sighed and walked over, already feeling the weight of impending doom. What's the issue? Ida pointed to her screen, where a series of red warnings flashed like an angry Christmas tree. The containment pods are destabilizing. The energy shift is having unintended consequences. Fantastic, Arvid muttered, running a hand through his hair. And here I was thinking things were going too smoothly. Suggestions? Vea asked, her eyes locked on Arvid with an intensity that could cut glass. We need to reinforce the containment fields, Arvid said, thinking on his feet. Pull power from non-essential systems. Life support stays, though. I'd rather not add suffocation to our list of problems. On it, Byron said, already typing commands with a speed that suggested he'd been preparing for this inevitability. Grunt, I need you to run manual checks on the pods, Arvid instructed. Make sure nothing is about to blow up in our faces. Grunt saluted with mock seriousness. Manual checks, got it. If anything's gonna explode, I'll make sure I'm not standing next to it. Despite the critical situation, Arvid felt a glimmer of hope. They were banding together, even in the face of overwhelming odds. Maybe that was the real power of humanity, stubbornly refusing to lay down and die when the universe seemed hell-bent on wiping them out. The Iors dragged on, an unending cycle of tension and frantic activity. Arvid kept one eye on the logs, the other on his team, praying that their efforts would pay off before the base decided to collapse in on itself. Arvid, Byron called from his station. We've got the energy matrices reconfigured. It's not pretty, but it should work. Great, Arvid replied, his heart pounding. Now let's see if we can turn a death ray into a healing beam. Vea chuckled darkly. That's quite the rebranding. Maybe we should call it Project Lazarus, the sequel. Let's get through this first, Arvid said, feeling the weight of their gamble. If we pull this off, I'll write the press release myself. They initiated the final sequence, the room holding its collective breath as energy surged through the reconfigured systems. Lights flickered, alarms blared, and for a moment it felt as if the base itself was holding its breath. Then miraculously the energy stabilized, holding steady in its new form. The containment pods hummed with a different kind of power, one that promised not destruction, but hope. "Well, I'll be damned," Grunt said, watching the readouts. "Looks like we might live to see another botched mission." "You say that like it's a bad thing," Byron quipped, the relief in his voice palpable. Arvid allowed himself a small smile, though he knew better than to relax completely. "Let's not start celebrating just yet. We've still got work to do." But there was a sense of achievement in the room, a quiet satisfaction that came from knowing they'd done something incredible. They'd taken the tools of their potential destruction and turned them towards saving lives, perhaps even their own. "Nice work, everyone," Vea said, her tone almost warm. "Now let's keep it that way." Arvid nodded, feeling the first real stirrings of optimism. It was a fragile thing, like a seed planted in barren soil, but it was there. Maybe this was just another step towards chaos, but for now it felt like a small victory, one that meant everything. As they continued to monitor the systems, Arvid felt a renewed sense of purpose. They'd been given a reprieve, a chance to set things right, and if there was one thing he'd learned, it was that sometimes, even in the darkest corners of the universe, all you needed was a little light to find your way through. "All right," Arvid said, clapping his hands together. "Let's get back to work. We've still got a planet to save, remember. Just another day at the office," Grunt replied, a grin tugging at his lips. "Right," Arvid said, feeling the weight of the task ahead, but also the lightness that comes with knowing you're not facing it alone. "Let's show the universe what we're made of." They dove back into their work, a team galvanized by the knowledge that they could make a difference. And maybe, just maybe, they'd find a way to win against the odds stacked against them. The operations room hummed with the kind of frenetic energy you usually only get in a casino or a failing marriage counselor's office. Arvid Callan stood at the center of the controlled chaos, feeling like the reluctant conductor of an orchestra where half the musicians were drunk and the other half were trying to light their instruments on fire. But hey, wasn't that life on Mercury? "All right, folks, show me what you've got," Arvid called, trying to sound more confident than he felt. He was aiming for inspiring leader, but suspected he was coming off more like a high school gym teacher rallying a losing team. Byron glanced up from his console, which was blinking with more colors than a disco ball on steroids. "Well, if you're interested in a premature explosion, I've got just the thing," he said, smirking as he keyed in another set of seemingly random commands. "You always know how to keep things exciting," Arvid replied dryly, "but let's try not to add self-inflicted kaboom to our resumes today, all right." Grunt was busy with the manual checks, his eyes narrowed in concentration. "If this thing goes up, I'm gonna haunt you, Arvid. Every time you try to sleep, I'll be there whispering, 'Told you so.'" "Great." "Another voice in my head is exactly what I need," Arvid shot back. "Just focus on not becoming a ghost, okay?" Ida was at her own station, her fingers a blur over the interface. "Containment fields are holding, but they are as stable as a politician's promises," she said, her voice steady despite the tension. "Then it's a miracle they're still coherent at all," Arvid quipped. "Keep an eye on it." "We're running out of backup plans." Vea, ever the hawk, kept the external threats at bay, her presence like a steel wall between them and the unfriendly universe outside. "You know, if we survive this, we should go into event planning. We've got plenty of experience handling disasters. Only if we can charge extra for emotional trauma," Arvid replied without missing a beat. The minutes dragged on, each one heavier than the last. The energy matrices were reconfigured, but the question hung in the air. Would they hold? The room was silent except for the buzzing of equipment and the occasional muttered curse from Byron as he argued with the stubborn interface. "All right, team," Arvid called. "We're at the pointy end now. Time to cross our fingers, toes, and any other appendages you've got spare. Let's see if we can pull a rabbit out of this hat, or if we're just gonna find another hole." "Here's hoping for rabbits," Ida said, her voice taut with anticipation. "Beats finding out our hat was a blender all along." With a silent nod from Vea, Arvid activated the final sequence. The room seemed to hold its breath, as though afraid any sound might tip the fragile balance they'd managed to achieve. The lights flickered, dimmed, then stabilized, bathing them in a steady glow that felt almost like a promise. "Energy output is stable," Byron reported, and the room collectively exhaled. "And no, I'm not just saying that to make you feel better. Good to know your sarcasm isn't a safety measure," Grunt muttered, though his relief was palpable. The containment pods, the source of so much tension and potential disaster, now hummed with a new kind of energy. Not the destructive force they'd feared, but something different, something that might just give them a fighting chance. "Looks like we've turned our death ray into something a bit less homicidal," Arvid said, hardly daring to believe it himself. "Who knew science could actually work? Don't jinx it," Vea warned, though her eyes held a glimmer of hope. "We've still got to make sure this sticks." Right, no jinxing, Arvid agreed, though the weight on his shoulders felt just a tad lighter. Let's keep monitoring. This thing's not over until it's over. The team moved with a new urgency, the prospect of success tantalizingly close. They were like marathon runners sprinting towards the finish line, exhaustion nipping at their heels but determination driving them forward. Grunt, how are those manual checks coming along? Arvid asked, peering over at him. About as well as can be expected, Grunt replied, wiping sweat from his brow. If this thing holds, I'll buy you a drink. If not, well, I'll haunt you anyway, so no loss there. Generous, Arvid said, his lips quirking up despite himself. Let's aim for that drink, yeah. As the minutes ticked by, the tension in the room began to ease, replaced by a cautious optimism. They'd managed to take a weapon of mass destruction and turn it into something hopeful. It was almost enough to make Arvid believe in miracles. All right, Vea said, her voice cutting through the room. Let's run one last diagnostic, make sure nothing's about to implode. On it, Byron said, already diving into the task. His fingers flew over the keyboard, the rapid fire typing a comforting sound amidst the silence. Arvid watched, feeling a strange mix of pride and disbelief. They'd done it. Against all odds, they'd managed to pull off a miracle. Or at least they'd survived another day without blowing themselves up, which felt pretty miraculous in its own right. Diagnostic is clear, Byron announced, his tone one of triumph. We're good to go. Excellent, Arvid said, the word feeling foreign but welcome on his tongue. Grunt let out a low whistle. Honestly didn't think we'd make it. Guess that's why they don't pay us the big bucks, huh? Speak for yourself, Arvid replied, though the joke felt light rather than cynical. Clearly, I need to negotiate a better contract. Ida stood, stretching out the tension from her shoulders. So what now? Figure out how to market this miraculous cure-all we've cooked up. First, we make sure it actually works, Arvid said. Then we worry about getting rich and famous. Vea chuckled, a sound of genuine amusement, trying to save the world one crisis at a time. I suppose there are worse ways to spend an afternoon. As they settled back into the routine of monitoring and recalibrating, the room felt different, lighter. As if for the first time, they could see a path forward that didn't end in catastrophe. Hey, Arvid, Grunt called, a rare note of sincerity in his voice. Nice job, boss. Didn't think you had it in you. Neither did I, Arvid admitted, a smile tugging at his lips. But I'm glad to be proven wrong. The team worked on, each member focused on their tasks but buoyed by the collective success. For a moment, the universe outside seemed a little less hostile. They'd taken a step forward, defied the odds, and come out the other side intact. You know, Arvid said, breaking the comfortable silence, I think we might actually be good at this whole saving the world thing. Don't let it go to your head, Vea replied, though her expression was one of fondness rather than admonition. We've still got a long way to go, but at least now we've got a map, Ida added, her voice thoughtful. We know what we can do, what we've done. Yeah, Grunt said, his usual sarcasm softened. Guess we're not as useless as we thought. Speak for yourself, Byron piped up, though the grin on his face belied his words. I happen to be incredibly useful. Modest too, Ida remarked, rolling her eyes. Arvid watched them, his team, and felt a swell of something that felt suspiciously like pride. They'd made it through together, and maybe, just maybe, they could keep going. All right, enough of the heartfelt speeches, Arvid said, clapping his hands to break the moment. Back to work, people. We've still got a whole universe out there waiting to be saved from itself. Just another day in paradise, Grunt said, but his smile was genuine. They returned to their tasks, the room alive with the energy of people who'd faced the abyss and come back with a story to tell. Maybe things wouldn't always go their way, and maybe the universe would keep throwing challenges their way. But if today was anything to go by, they'd find a way through. And as Arvid looked around at the faces of his team, he felt a flicker of hope. Because it turns out, against all odds and idiotic choices, that hope was the one thing they had in spades. And maybe, just maybe, it would be enough. Arvid Callan leaned back in his chair, the sort of chair that made a wooden plank seem like a memory foam mattress, and closed his eyes. The operations room, now a little less like a pressure cooker and more like a slightly agitated kettle, hummed around him with the usual understated chaos that seemed to define life on Mercury. His team had pulled off a miracle, albeit a messy, jury-rigged one, but they had done it. Captain Vea Toran entered, her presence a mix of command and leftover tension that could probably shatter glass if she stared at it long enough. Well, Arvid, looks like we didn't blow up today. Color me surprised. Yes, it's always the little things that make life worth living, Arvid replied, opening one eye to regard her. Like not becoming space dust. Guess we can cross that off the bucket list, Vea said, folding her arms and leaning against the doorframe. So what's next? World peace and free coffee for all. Well, seeing as how coffee is still considered a diuretic and world peace is slightly above our pay grade, I was thinking more along the lines of securing this place, Arvid said. Make sure our alien bioweapon-turned terraformer doesn't decide to change its mind. Grunt, having finished his round of manual checks, chimed in, "Yeah, last thing we need is for this thing to wake up on the wrong side of the bed and decide it's back to its homicidal tendencies." "Noted," Arvid said, sitting up straighter and feeling the stiffness in his back. "But it looks like it's behaving for now, like a cat that hasn't yet realized it's on an unguarded shelf." Ida Voss stood by the console, her fingers still twitching like they were being chased by a pack of wild data entries. "I've got my eye on the containment fields. They're holding steady, but I'll believe it when I see them behave over a long weekend." "Perfect. And if they do act up, we can always invite Kallax for a motivational speech," Arvid suggested. "If we want all the equipment to self-destruct," Ida said with a wry smile. "But seriously, I think Kallax might actually have been onto something when it said the bioweapon could be repurposed." "Hope springs eternal," Vea muttered, but the spark in her eyes suggested she wasn't entirely immune to this newfound optimism. "Maybe now you can finally name the project something other than Lazarus. I was thinking Phoenix, but that's a bit too cliché." "Maybe Project It Didn't Kill Us," Arvid replied. Byron, who had been lurking in the background pretending to be busy calibrating, piped up, "How about Project Miracle, since we just pulled one off?" "Don't get ahead of yourself, Byron. The universe hates happy endings," Grunt said. "But sure, we can call it whatever as long as we get to live." They were alive, the base was secure, and their little miracle seemed to be holding up. Against all odds, they had turned a potential disaster into something manageable, if not quite yet a solution. Arvid looked around at his team, a group of misfits and geniuses who had somehow managed not to blow themselves sky high or implode in a spectacular fashion. "All right," he said, once more the reluctant leader, "let's wrap this up. Secure the base, monitor the weapon Sori terraformer, and then maybe we catch a few hours of sleep, if that's still a thing." Vea nodded. "I'll handle the external security. Make sure no curious onlookers decide to drop by uninvited." "Perfect," Arvid said, giving her a mock salute. "And someone get Grunt a drink." "He's earned it," Grunt grinned, a rare sight that looked almost unnatural on him. "I'll hold you to that, boss." Ida's voice cut in, sharp but not unkind. "I'll keep an eye on the data. Make sure our miracle doesn't turn back into a pumpkin." "Thanks, Ida, and Byron, keep flirting with that console. At least one of us should have a steady relationship," Arvid said. "Hey, just because it's got more blinking lights than sense doesn't mean it's not a good listener," Byron retorted, not missing a beat. The team dispersed, each to their tasks, but the air felt lighter, more charged with something other than impending doom. Maybe it was relief, or maybe just the euphoria of surviving another day without becoming the universe's latest cautionary tale. As Arvid pulled up the latest reports, he couldn't help but let his thoughts wander. The weapon terraformer, whatever it had become, could represent a new era, not just for them, but for humanity. It was technology that could turn wastelands into green paradises, or at least something that didn't look like Mercury's armpit. If they could get it stable, reliable, not prone to tantrums worse than a toddler in a candy store's closing hours. "Hey, Arvid," Byron called from across the room, his voice breaking through Arvid's spiraling thoughts. "We've got a message coming in from HQ. Probably want to know if we're still breathing." "Great," Arvid muttered. Time for the debrief of doom. He made his way to the comm station, taking a deep breath before activating the connection. The screen flickered to life, displaying the stern face of Commander Hale, a man who looked like he had been carved from a block of granite, and then told that smiling was a punishable offense. "Dr. Callan," Hale said, his voice as warm as a Mercury winter. "Report, we're still in one piece, Commander," Arvid replied, trying to match the man's severity and failing spectacularly. "Managed to stabilize the bioweapon terraformer now, I guess, without blowing us to smithereens." Hale's eyes narrowed, possibly a sign of approval, though it was hard to tell. "Good, was there any collateral? We're all accounted for." "No casualties except maybe my sanity," Arvid said, unable to resist the jab. "Turns out we're pretty good at not dying. A skill that often goes underappreciated," Hale said, the ghost of a smile threatening to crack his stony facade. "What's the status of the bioweapon?" "Stable for now," Arvid said, more serious now. "We've managed to reconfigure it into something less threatening and more beneficial. We're monitoring it to ensure it stays that way." "Excellent work," Hale said, and Arvid couldn't help but feel a flicker of pride at the rare praise. "Keep us updated on any developments. And Callan," "Yes, Commander, try not to blow up Mercury. It's the only armpit we've got." The screen blinked out, leaving Arvid to reflect on the fact that, for once, he had nothing to complain about. Well, almost nothing. Ior's passed, filled with the monotonous routine of science, data collection, analysis, and the occasional curse when the equipment decided to throw a tantrum. Despite their success, the tension never fully dissipated. It lingered like a shadow in the corner of the room, a reminder of what they were dealing with. Eventually, Arvid found himself standing outside the operations room, the cold, sterile corridor a world away from the warmth of the controlled chaos inside. He leaned against the wall, closing his eyes and letting the silence wash over him. "Hey," Vea's voice broke through the quiet, and he opened his eyes to find her standing beside him, an uncharacteristically soft expression on her face. "You okay?" "Yeah, just thinking," Arvid replied, offering her a small smile. "Still can't quite believe we pulled it off." "Neither can I," she admitted, crossing her arms and leaning against the wall beside him. "But we did, and maybe now things will get a little easier." "Maybe," Arvid agreed, though he knew better than to hope for smooth sailing. "But at least we proved we can handle things. Even if none of us really knew what we were doing half the time." Vea chuckled, a rare, genuine sound that made the sterile corridor feel almost cozy. "Isn't that what life is? Pretending to know what you're doing until something explodes." Arvid laughed softly, the sound echoing in the empty hallway. "Yes, something like that." They stood in comfortable silence, the weight of their recent success settling over them like a warm blanket. For the first time in what felt like forever, Arvid allowed himself to feel hopeful, not just for the future of their project, but for the future of humanity. "Hey, Arvid," Vea said, her voice breaking through his thoughts once more. "Thanks for not blowing us up." "Anytime," Arvid replied, grinning as he pushed off the wall and headed back towards the operations room. "Let's just hope we can keep the streak going." Returning to the operations room, Arvid found it bustling with activity. Byron was engaged in an animated argument with the console. Ida was deep in discussion with Grunt about the long-term stability of their creation, and the room was alive with the kind of energy that spoke of determination rather than desperation. "All right, team," Arvid announced, clapping his hands to get their attention. "Let's finish securing this place and make sure our terraformer stays nice and docile." "Aye, aye, Captain." Byron saluted with exaggerated enthusiasm, earning a round of chuckles from the others. Grunt, ever the realist, added, "And if it doesn't, we just repeat the same song and dance, right?" "Pretty much," Arvid agreed, his tone light but serious. "But hopefully with less dancing and more, well, science." "Can't make any promises," Ida said, a rare twinkle in her eye. "Some of us are better at dancing than others." The room erupted into laughter, the sound ringing out like a bell in what had once been a battlefield. Despite the challenges they still faced, despite the uncertainty of what lay ahead, Arvid felt a sense of camaraderie that made it all worthwhile. "All right, enough chit-chat," he said, waving a hand to quiet the group. "Let's get back to work. We've got a universe to save after all, and maybe a drink to celebrate later," Grunt suggested, ever hopeful. "Definitely," Arvid promised, feeling a warmth spread through him that had nothing to do with the room. "Drinks are on me." With renewed energy, the team returned to their tasks, the air alive with the promise of what they could achieve together. They had faced the abyss and come back stronger for it, and now, against all odds, they had a chance to change the world. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough.